Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I rise this evening to oppose this bill, along with my opposition colleagues, because I fear this establishes a process that undermines the very referendum that we're all going to participate in as Australians. A change to our constitution is a very momentous thing. It's a big thing, and it involves all Australians. And it's very, very important that we have the whole population informed about the change they're being asked to vote on, and that the information that they're given is accurate, correct, and that it's a level playing field and they get both sides of the argument. And I'm not confident that this bill does that. This is a really important question that the Australian people are being asked to answer. The question of whether we have a voice to Parliament or to the Executive established. And it's a debate that needs to be handled with care, with prudence and with respect. And I fear this bill alloys the debate by depriving it of the integrity and the process that it demands, it absolutely requires. Now, we have raised 3 points for the government to address our concerns on the referendum process. Number one, we made the case that the pamphlet to outline the yes and no case be restored, and that has been done. We also argued that there should be an official yes and no campaign organisations established, and finally that those organisations are funded appropriately. And those second and third points have not yet been agreed to by the government, which is why we're opposing this bill. So, Deputy Speaker, why are we advocating for the retention of a pamphlet? Well, without a pamphlet, this bill sets a very dangerous precedent, and there is no valid reason or precedent for deliberately not providing one. Setting a new standard for the conduct of referenda in this instance will create precedents for future referenda. And as I said, it's really important that the Australian population is fully apprised of what they're voting on. They understand both the yes and no arguments, and that they go into the ballot box understanding exactly what they're being asked to do. There's always been a requirement for a pamphlet. In fact, it was implemented back in 1912. And there have been 3 referenda without an official pamphlet, 1919, 1926 and 1928. In 1919, there was insufficient time to produce the pamphlet. In 1926, there was no agreement on how to produce the yes argument. And in 1928, there was overwhelming agreement between parties and governments on the question. Of those referenda, none of the circumstances apply. We know there's not complete agreement on this issue. We have the time to produce a pamphlet, and we can get agreement on how to argue the cases. So it's really, really important that we have this pamphlet, and I'm glad the government has agreed to provide it as part of this bill. Now, it's really important that people use official material. One of the things that I've noticed, and indeed I experienced myself going through school, was the decline of civics in this country. Of course, during our education, we get taught about our system of government, about the Parliament, about the judiciary, how our democracy works, all the constituent parts, how they come together. But I think over the last 20 years there has been a decline in civics, and that's why it's so important that we provide a pamphlet for Australians as they are being asked this important question. At the same time we've seen a decline in civics, we've also seen an increase in misinformation, which has been accelerated by social media. I recall a few years ago I went to a local high school in my electorate, and I asked a group of students, Year 10, I said, who do you trust more, Facebook or the government? And overwhelmingly they trusted the government over Facebook, largely because online people don't know what they can trust anymore. And so we've seen the decline in civics, the increase in misinformation out there, and people are digitally saturated as it is. A lot of the information that we get, whether it be bills, banking information, you name it, it comes to us via email. And a lot of those things get missed because of the saturation we all feel from the digital world on our individual devices. And so a pamphlet is a really good way to get people to pause, whether it be at the kitchen table or wherever it is in their home, sit down and consider the issues before them. And in this case, the question on whether or not to establish a voice. And the one thing I will say about the online world, and the member for Fisher raised it just before, is the increase of misinformation driven by state actors, non-state actors and other malign forces. In fact, we've heard ASIO over the last few years talk about the risk of foreign interference in our elections and how we are seeing levels of espionage and foreign interference being conducted in this country at levels unprecedented that far exceed, in fact, the Cold War. And so for people to receive a pamphlet from the Australian government with the coat of arms on it that says this is the question you're being asked to consider, this is the change to the Constitution, this is the yes case, this is the no case, I think in a world of uncertainty, in a world of digital saturation, such a pamphlet is an excellent idea, and I think it's great that the government has met us on that request. I am concerned as well about the role that big tech will play in this debate. We've seen how big tech has operated. We've seen how some of the companies do business, whether it be censorship, shadow banning. We've seen how the algorithms work. We've had plenty of testimony from people across the world who've worked for some of these big companies and have seen how they do business. And I've got to say, it alarms me that these foreign companies will have a say in the way that the question is shaped, the way people interpret the data and arguments coming at them. And again, that's another good reason why we need to have that pamphlet delivered to people in their homes so they can consider the arguments for themselves. The other thing I'll say about social media is that the algorithms are driven by outrage. It's almost as if social media is designed to push us to the extremes, to polarise us, to create outrage, to divide us and to separate us from each other. And I think for this question, it's very sensitive. It goes to a very central question around reconciliation in this country. It's got to be handled with care, and I have no faith in social media that the way it's done business in the past, that it will be able to conduct or assist Australians through this very, very sensitive debate over the next 6 to 8 months. So again, I'm very glad the pamphlet has been agreed to. Second question is, why are we advocating for an official yes and no campaign? Well, I think the main point here is that it will increase the trust and integrity in this process. Having an official yes and no campaign will make things simpler for the regulatory environment and for the proper conduct of the referendum. We've seen evidence from the AEC to parliamentary committees that the donation and disclosure regime remains the most complex part of the Electoral Act, and having two single points of contact for yes and no campaigns is vital, I think, particularly so that people know when they're receiving messages from those campaigns, they can at least have confidence that they're coming from an officially sanctioned campaign, and that it's not misinformation or disinformation. So it'll create order and simplicity in an otherwise very complex undertaking. And as I said, this is a very sensitive question. And so to have the pamphlet out there will assist with misinformation, and then to have an official yes and no campaign will also provide that order and simplicity for people, and again, increase the integrity of the process. Finally, why are we asking for equal funding? Well, it's really important that both these bodies, the yes and no campaigns, if they are established, and at the moment they won't be by this bill, which is why we're opposing it, but if they are established, it's really important that they have equal funding, as we saw in the last referendum in 1999 on the question of whether to become a republic or not. And that gives each side the opportunity to build their campaigns, get the arguments out there, and again it creates a level and equal playing field. As it stands, we've seen a lot of corporates already come out for one side of the campaign, and again I think there's going to be an unequal playing field if the yes-no campaigns are not funded equally. So, Deputy Speaker, we will oppose this bill. We hope the government comes to its senses and creates that level and playing field. They've restored the pamphlet for the yes and no case, but they're yet to establish an official yes and no campaign, and they're yet to appropriately fund those official campaigns. And so in closing, we will oppose this, and I call on them to implement those two amendments. Thank you.